Do you feel the need? The need for leads? The reality for most of us as business owners is that we rely on consistent sales for both business growth and ongoing viability. Those sales don't come from simply throwing content and offers at strangers on the internet. Instead, we need a steady flow of motivated, qualified leads. Inside the Takeoff program, we are currently preparing for Leads at Speed. This is a 2-week event to flood your inbox with those high-intent, hot leads. But if you'd like to join us, the doors to the Takeoff program are closing on the 7th of March. So make sure that you head to tashcorbin.com/takeoff and check it all out today. And if you'd like to join us for Leads at Speed, make sure that you enroll before the 7th of March. That link again is tashcorbin.com/takeoff. Hello, brilliant entrepreneur, and welcome to day 3 of Tashmas, where from the 1st to the 12th of March, I'm releasing daily episodes of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast, and every day there's a fabulous gift for you. In today's episode, I want to talk through one of the critical parts of success behind launches that we can sometimes forget when we get into launch mode. So I'm sharing the forgotten key to launching successfully. This is episode number 464, which means you can find all the relevant links and the show notes for today's episode, including your special Tashmas gift, over at tashcorbin.com/464. Let's do it. Hello, I'm Tash Corbin, a business strategist and mentor based on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. The mission of this podcast is to help heart-centered entrepreneurs to make more money, and in doing so, change the world for the better. This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Let's start with a quick definition, because launches by definition are limited time campaigns. So when I'm talking about a launch in this case, I'm talking about launching a product, a course, a membership, a package. It's where you have some lead magnets, some events, and you have a limited time where you are campaigning to make sales of your product or service. So it could be the first time that you launch a new course or a membership or a product, or it can be a relaunch. So for example, I launch the Takeoff program around 3 times each year. Sometimes when I'm launching, I'll do a couple of webinars, and each of those is helping people move closer to being ready for the Takeoff program and presenting the Takeoff program as the offer. But sometimes I'll also do webinars and a challenge like my Client Attraction Challenge. Most launches go for around 8 to 10 weeks in their entirety. Some people get their launches right down to like a 2-week period, but in most cases, I would say 4 to 8 weeks is the average length of time for a launch. But that means when we are planning out our year, we can get ourselves caught in this very short-term focus where we have an 8-week window focused on launching one product and then another 8-week window focused on launching another, and you're just rolling in from launch to launch, and therefore you're very much stuck in that short-term focus. But if you want to deliver a great launch after a great launch after a great launch, what builds that momentum is a key to launch success that is often forgotten. And that key is long-term audience growth. In order for each of those launches to be successful, it needs to be reaching wider and wider audiences. And in particular, we want to have bigger and bigger warm audiences that know you, like you, trust you, feel connected to you, are aware of your products and services, are aware of the way that you might be able to support them. They're aware of your specializations and your experience. And so that's where long-term list growth in particular is a priority. If someone is on your mailing list before a launch begins, they are much more likely to engage, to sign up to the lead magnets, to be part of that launch, and importantly, they are far more likely to buy. So what's really important to ensuring your launches become more and more successful is actually your list growth that happens outside of your launch. It's having that list growth on autopilot behind the scenes. In a lot of cases, it might even mean taking a little while off launching in particular and giving your audience some time where you are only focused on list growth. You're only focused on nurture. Now, this is where things can get a little bit tricky because, as I shared in a previous Tashmas episode, we can sometimes fall into this trap of believing the very extremes in the strategy and that one or the other is better and one or the other is worse. So there are some people who only launch their signature product once a year and the rest of the year they are just focused on list growth and nurturing. They might have some little flash sales of little products or other things that they're doing throughout the year, but really 95% of their income comes in their once a year launch. And those people are often very focused on convincing everyone else that that's the best model. And they can also overstate the benefit of that approach and understate some of the risks. So one of the most obvious risks of that model is that if you have a launch that isn't as successful as you were expecting, that was your one time of the year where you were relying on your biggest income surge, most of your income coming in for the year, most of your sales coming in for the year. If that launch isn't as successful as you expected or as you'd hoped, then it can leave you scrambling and needing to then spend time rebuilding into putting in a second launch for the year or adding in other income sources to make up for that lost opportunity and the fact that all your eggs were in that one basket. And we've actually seen this happen for quite a few people who use that model over the last 2 or 3 years, because we've seen increasing costs of living, we've seen lower consumer confidence, we've seen a lot more uncertainty about people's futures than some of the types of products that would be purchased in these once a year launches then haven't done as well in those launches, and we've seen people scrambling a little. And so that is the potential downside of that. But the other thing I see people then sway their way all the way over to is having no launches whatsoever and only ever having sales come in through evergreen funnels. And so they never do launches because they had a big launch and it was stressful and it wasn't as successful as they'd hoped. Generally, that's the pathway through which people end up in the evergreen model. And what happens then is without having those launch events, it can sometimes lead to a lot lower conversion rates into your programs or into your offers. And so there are some people who they only ever do evergreen funnels and they only ever have sales kind of coming in those autopilot sort of funnels perspectives, or they only ever have sales coming in through stuff that's going out all the time. And so, yes, there's a benefit to that because you don't have that like big event that you need to ramp up to. Some people find launching quite stressful. I personally don't, because behind the scenes, all of my launches are taken care of by my team. I just turn up and run my webinar. I turn up and do some Facebook Lives, but everything's prepared well in advance. And so it's not necessarily as stressful for me as I hear other people find the launching process. It's definitely taken me some time to get to that stage in my business and not have launching be a time where I'm, investing extra time in my business. But, some people do find it particularly stressful. So they go to this completely evergreen model. But that has its benefits. Yes, you're not in that stressful event-based situation. You don't have to be a certain place at a certain time, that kind of thing. But then the downside of that can be that there's less conversion, and without those live connected events, the conversion rate of those funnels can sometimes be quite a lot lower than if you inserted a launch or two into your year. So in most cases, what I end up doing with my clients and what I end up doing myself is having that evergreen list growth going on behind the scenes at all times and consistently focusing on getting my audience growing and particularly my mailing list. And then I have my launches scattered throughout the year. Now, I don't love doing launch back to back with another launch, back to back with another launch. I definitely prefer to have a good 4 to 8 weeks between my launches where I might, I might be talking about something like conference or virtual conference. I'll do something like this, like Tashmas. I'm not in launch right now, but I've got these podcast episodes going out daily for 12 days. There are offers involved. There's some giveaways, there's prizes, but there are also discounted offers involved. So I will have some sales coming in through this Tashmas event, but I wouldn't call this a launch because Tashmas generally is more focused on nurturing my warmest audience. It's very much focused on being more about what I can give and the giveaways and the prizes and those sorts of things rather than trying to get lots and lots of conversion. And it doesn't have the same email support structure as a launch would have. So for me, I did my takeoff launch in February. So I had 2 webinars that I ran in February this year to launch the takeoff program. I'm not going into another launch of the takeoff program probably until June, maybe even July. But at the end of this month, I'm running virtual conference, and from virtual conference, I'll focus on letting people know about the in-person conference in Noosa. So again, it's not necessarily a launch, but there's stuff going on. But in those times where it's definitely not a structured, planned, specific launch, my number one priority in my business is list growth. It is growing my audience. And so I really want to hit home this message in this podcast episode. The forgotten key to successful launches, and particularly launch after launch being successful and scaling up the results of your launches, is actually the list growth that happens on autopilot, the list growth that happens behind the scenes, and the list growth that happens between your launches. Going out to cold audiences and bringing them onto your mailing list by having your content pointing to lead magnets, things that get people onto your mailing list, opt-ins, by having, things like interviews on other people's podcasts or being a guest speaker somewhere, and that's getting people onto your mailing list. Now, my number one strategy for growing my mailing list is simply free lead magnets, free opt-ins with Facebook ads. That these days is my number one strategy. And in January, February this year, I actually was blocked from running ads on Facebook due to participating in one of those little fun posts where it says see whatever you see in the word search is your word of the year. And I happened to see a naughty word. So I commented with that naughty word. And unfortunately, it got me instantly banned from doing Facebook Lives, from starting messenger chats, and from running Facebook ads on my account. And I did appeal that twice. Both of my appeals were rejected. I even upgraded to the paid version of Facebook to see if I could get extra help with their extra chat box. I got through to their chat support team, and again, it was rejected. So I just had to wait it out. So for 30 days, I couldn't run ads, but I'm back running them again. And the reason why I say that is because I think a lot of times when people mostly see my organic strategies on social media, they might assume that that's what I'm focused on to grow my audience. Yes, I started my list growth and I do get quite substantial list growth from my organic strategies. But when it comes to attracting people onto your mailing list, the organic strategies that you use are really testing what works, what people get excited about, what promos are the most effective, what lead magnets get people onto your mailing list that your audience really love and attract the right people who are interested in what it is that you're doing, that are close to being ready to purchase, right? All of those things. I test that all out with my organic strategies, but all of that is through the lens of once I find something that works, I don't want to be spending lots and lots of time continuously having to promote the same things over and over again. I just want to set that up on autopilot. And that's what ads allow me to do. Instead of putting time into growing my mailing list, I can put money into growing my mailing list. And the reason why I always test it organically first is that I'm only then ever focused on ads to grow my mailing list through things that have been validated, through opt-ins that I know do their job. Their job is to attract the right people onto my mailing list, to nurture a relationship with them, and also to move them closer to that readiness to purchase, move them closer to being at the point where buying something from me is the next logical step. So I test how effectively my lead magnets do that with my organic strategies. And once I know it works and it does its job, and I'm now at the point where I know for every 100 people I get on my mailing list, 3 of them will purchase within 30 days and a further 10 to 20 will purchase within 90 days, I now know that I can invest money into list growth because I get return on that investment, and that return is very healthy. The reason why I wanted to be really open about that is because I see a lot of people in the early stages of their business getting very overwhelmed and catastrophizing what level of workload they think they're signing themselves up to forever. To get the first 500 people on their mailing list, they do it mostly organically. They're testing out a bunch of different webinars and opt-ins, and they're posting on socials very consistently. A lot of the people who join their mailing list, they've had conversations with. And so the 0 to 500 journey when it comes to growing your mailing list can be a particularly intense one in terms of the workload that you need to put in and the time that it can take. But in doing so, you're making sales because you've got a very connected relationship with those people, and you're testing what happens when you're sending out regular emails, you're testing sales emails to that audience, you're doing lead generation from that audience. And so with 500 people on your mailing list, you should be making some sales, and most people are making sales. If you're not making sales, that's definitely something we need to address. And so you can then see some data that on average, if I have 500 people on my mailing list, I make $15,000 in sales. And so the next 500 people that you get onto your mailing list, you can start getting more of them coming in through ads rather than having to put so much time and energy in. So we're creating this sort of like snowball approach, and instead of using effort and time and energy to keep growing the list in exactly the same way, we layer in some of those more autopilot strategies for list growth, such as having SEO'd content on your website, and people are then being invited to sign up for an opt-in there. That can be really helpful, and there are some really SEOable businesses and niches and topics that people have, and so that's a really helpful strategy. But but that can take time. That can also take money, having someone help you with the SEO of your website. And you're going to have to create, that consistent content in terms of the longer form to keep that, coming up at the top of Google, all of those sorts of things. But then things like social media ads, Facebook ads, Google ads, all of those things are ways that you can stop putting so much time into list growth and instead start investing money and reinvesting money that you've been making in your business. You can also be investing money with more confidence because you know that when people sign up for this particular lead magnet, 5% of them end up reaching out to work with you. Or when people sign up for this particular webinar, 3% of those people end up buying the offer that was on the webinar, whatever that percentage might be. So you've got data now to show that your lead magnet is validated, that your return on investment is validated. So therefore, you can start experimenting with some low-cost ads and supplementing your organic list growth with ads and with paid list growth. And then you're just shifting the balance a little. So these days, 80% of my list growth comes from ads, 20% of my list growth comes from organic. Now, again, I just want to touch on a couple of tiny little nuances. Number one, the 20% that come in from organic strategies have a higher conversion rate and a higher average spend per person, because they've generally come in through referrals or someone, like they've found me organically because someone that they know has commented on my posts, or, there's a little more connection there if they've come in through organic strategies. Whereas if the first thing that they see of mine is an ad for a lead magnet on social media, they sign up for that lead magnet, it's a much colder audience. But the difference is not huge. So the percentage of people who buy something from me within a year would be, for organic, it would probably be about 23%. And for people who come in from ads, it's like 17%. So it's not huge. And in terms of percentage difference, and I would also argue the energy and effort and resources that actually go into getting people on my list from ads is much lower for me because I have the money to spend on those ads. I'm not spending my last dollar trying to get someone onto my mailing list. I'm reinvesting from the profits of my business into consistently growing from there. So it is that ongoing list growth that we really want to nail in order to support those increasing results from launch to launch, in order to support your launch doing well time after time. And a great example of where this can go wrong for people is I was helping someone with their first ever course launch many years ago. And she had been growing her mailing list organically for 5 or 6 years. She had only ever worked with people one-on-one, so she'd never offered a course before. She was also starting to see a bit more organic reach and presence on social media, people referring her. She also spoke at a couple of events. And so she engaged me to mentor her through launching her first course and creating the course. And we did that, and she sold 42 spaces on her first launch. And that was like a really great launch result, made her thousands and thousands of dollars. And she was so excited by that launch result that she wanted to, as soon as she'd finished delivering the 8-week program, she wanted to go and launch it again. And I had said to her, we only did like a short-term engagement working together one-on-one. And I had said to her, your number one job while you're delivering this first round of your course is you need to go and double your list size, your mailing list, because you have now, for want of a better phrase, fished that pond, right? You've now already launched this product to your existing audience. Now, yes, there will be some people in your existing audience who didn't buy in the first launch, but will buy in the second, absolutely. But that is going to be a much lower percentage if there's no new people in that audience. And unfortunately, she didn't get that sorted and she did go straight into another launch, and that launch only made 2 sales. And I 100% believe that the number one reason why that was the case was because that second launch didn't have enough new audience there. And while she did get new audience in the second launch itself, so she did some ads and she did a promo of her webinars and all that sort of thing. So some of the people who signed up for her webinars for that launch were new to her audience, but because they were so new, they didn't purchase. They hadn't had the time on her mailing list, hadn't had the time in her audience to develop that relationship, to build that know, like, trust factor, to, feel like they were ready to purchase her program. And so, yes, it was great for her list growth doing that launch, but the launch result was super disappointing for her. And so that's why I really want to hit this point home, that key to launching successfully is growing your audience. And as much as possible, having that happen consistently all the time, whether you're launching or not, and knowing that the sooner someone joins your list, the sooner they are going to have had that opportunity to build that trust and to be ready then to purchase from you the next time that you launch. So, your beautiful gift for today's episode of the podcast and for day 3 of Tashmas is a freebie that I already have available called Grow Your Audience. But anyone who's ever registered for the Grow Your Audience training will be invited on the 12th of March via email to come to a bonus live call. So I'm going to be doing a live call about growing your mailing list. But in order to get invited to that live call, you need my Grow Your Audience training, and I would recommend that you've watched it by then. So make sure that you come over to the show notes of today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/464 and grab the link and sign up for my Grow Your Audience free training. And if you can, make sure that you watch it before coming along to our bonus live call that will be happening in late March. So it'll be happening later in March, but the email invitation will go out on the 12th of March and you'll need to accept that invitation. You'll need to register. So it's only going to people who've got the Grow Your Audience training. If you're not sure whether you've ever grabbed this training from me before or not, still go and register because it won't double subscribe you to my mailing list or emails or anything like that. So there's no risk of double subscribing or anything along those lines. And if you can't remember, it might be a good idea to just go and maybe rewatch it at double speed so that you can remind yourself of the key points from that Grow Your Audience training. So then you are ready to go for our live call. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Heart Centered Business podcast. I'll see you tomorrow for day 4 of Tashmas. And until then, I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now.